So good morning, everybody. It's very nice to see all of you here. I'm Professor of Chinese Studies at University of Helsinki. My name is Julie Chen. Feel free to call me Julie. In fact, I have a second affiliation. I'm a hosting professor at Pulaski University in Czech Republic. And I think it's in this context, I get to know Ute Wallenberg's work. And I haven't had too much exchanges with her, but I learned that she's having this very exciting new project related to Tibetan food and perhaps a plural terms of Tibetan foods and identity in a global context. So I'm really delighted that I have the chance to invite Ute Wallenberg to speak with us today. A bit about her. I guess some of the audience do know her, but just a very quick introduction of Ute. She's currently assistant professor for Chinese Studies at Masaryk University, Brno in Czech Republic. She is also simultaneously engaged in the EU-funded project. It's called Sinophone Borderland Interaction at the Ages project at Pulaski University, Urumqi. I think it's in that context I get to know her. And it's amazing that she was trained as both a sinologist and Tibetologist, and she holds a PhD in Chinese Studies from the University of Vienna and a further degree in social pedagogy. And she has expertise in Tibeto-Mongol interface at the Sino-Tibetan borderlands and on China's ethnic minorities. And I think today she will focus more on her new project on the Tibetan food, which is quite new. I cannot find many academic literatures on this. And in order to kind of spice up the discussions, I have invited, I would say, my colleague, Tiina Hyppönen. She's a PhD candidate in East Asian Studies at University of Helsinki. And I know Tiina has been working on the Tibetan studies for years as well. So the idea is that we will enjoy the conversation and help each other to improve our knowledge and improve our research. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Ute. Welcome.
Thank you, Julie. First, I try again to share my screen. I hope you can see it now.
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Julie, for your kind invitation giving this lecture. And also, I'm very glad to finally meet Tiina as my discussant again. We haven't met for many years. And as already Julie said today, I will give a brief talk on my new research topic, namely on food and beverages as a vehicle of Tibetan culture and identity. But today it will be just a very broad overview, as I said, and my preliminary ideas of my research. Food and identity are a very broad topic, which has been investigated quite intensively by academics of the various disciplines in the past years. And food topics in terms of Asian and South Asian food became very popular. However, it was quite surprising for me that there has been hardly any academic research done on Tibetan food. According to the Tibetan legend, the Tibetan people originated from the union of an ape and a rock ogress, and the children were half human and half ape. That's the story, actually, of the origin of Tibetans. And to feed their children, the ape, an emanation of Avalokiteshvara, brought them the so-called 6 kinds of grains, as described by Ralph Stein. At this point, I already referred to the Vyusi, the 4th Tantra of Sowa Rigpa, the science of healing. In chapter 16 of the 2nd section of the 4th Tantra, the explanatory tantra, the 6 grains are listed by being again divided into leguminous crops such as beans and peas, and crops such as rice, millet, wheat, and different kinds of barley. In fact, this section also deals with dietetics by differentiating into food and beverages, whereas food is divided into 5 items, namely grain, meat, greens, butter with fats, and food cooked. In terms of beverages, milk, water, chang, fermented grain, and others are explained. But since Sowa Rigpa is not focus of my research, I won't get deeper into this topic. However, I want at least to highlight that quite some academic research has been done on the various aspects of Sowa Rigpa, on nutrition, but not on food. Not only by medical doctors or pharmacologists, but also by Tibetologists and social anthropologists in the field of ethnomedicine. Then, in terms of cultural anthropology, the Tibetologist Petra Maurer, she gives a general overview of Tibetan food in a rather short non-academic article. But besides that, however, at the moment I can say that hardly any anthropological research has been done on the topic of Tibetan food. Actually, Diana Lange, who is also sitting here in the audience today, she worked on fishery on the Tibetan plateau and the use of fish in the Tibetan diet. And actually also worth mentioning is Uchi's dissertation from the University of Helsinki from 2013. In his dissertation, he at least briefly addressed food in Amdo society and the changes of daily foods in modern history. And then there are also various contributions in the transdisciplinary journal Asian Highland Perspectives, with its focus on the Tibetan plateau. In some of the articles, in connection with rituals and festivals, food is described, such as in Timothy Thurston and Tserang Samdrup's paper on Losar, Tibetan New Year, in the Tibetan village in Amdo. However, the most recent research done on Tibetan food is by Geoffrey Barstow. In his book, Food of Sinful Demons, he focuses on the history of vegetarianism on the Tibetan plateau regarding Tibetan Buddhism. Thus, that's actually more or less the current state of academic research on Tibetan food. However, please keep in mind that this research is still in an early stage and there's still a lot of work to be done. Therefore, I cannot guarantee for its completeness. Having briefly summarized the state of research, and before getting deeper into the topic, I will now outline today's lecture so you know the topic I will talk about. The ones who know me and my previous research might wonder how I actually got into this topic. Besides my personal interest in food and cooking, there's a connection between my dissertation and the topic of food and identity. That's why I will start with an outline of my dissertation, which was published as a monograph in 2019. Then I will present my very general research objectives and research question upon which I started approaching the food project. As an introduction into the topic of Tibetan food, I will then give you a first brief outline of ethnographic Tibet and its society, before I will follow up with a description of major foods and ingredients before the 1950s. Based upon selected travel reports written by Western missionaries, adventurers, and scholars. Then I will shed light on the development of Tibetan food in a global context after the 1980s. And last but not least, instead of a conclusion, I will come up with further questions. My dissertation. In my dissertation, I investigated the construction of collective identity of the Tibet-Mongol population in contemporary Henan-Mongol Autonomous County in Qinghai Province, embedded in the theoretical framework of memory based on long-term ethnographic fieldwork. Here on the map, you can see contemporary China's Qinghai Province, and the three yellow regions comprise today's Huangnan Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. And the very southern yellow region is contemporary Henan County, in colloquial Tibetan known as Sokzong or Malo Sokzong. The area of contemporary Henan County, previously known as the Henan Grasslands, or more precisely, the grassland south of the Yellow River, is inhabited by Tibetans and Mongols. The arrival of the first Mongols in that area can be traced back to the 13th century. Then, with the 17th century, Gushri Khan's groups were occupying the area of Kokonor, or in Chinese Qinghai. From 1637 until 1723, the Khoshud Mongols ruled the area of Kokonor. And after that, the area has been integrated into the Qing Empire. Due to the long-term mutual contacts between Tibetans and Mongols, a milieu was created in which unique local customs, language patterns, and social communities have emerged, the origins of which lie in encounters between Tibetan and Mongol cultures that share certain features to form a new, distinct culture, which I won't elaborate in today's talk. In my ethnographic fieldwork, I focused on the collective identity of the population of Henan County and their position between being Tibetan and being Mongol. I argue that the collective identity is constructed by the interleaving of politically motivated action, shared memories, and the role of lieu de mémoire. Now you might question yourself, what is the connection between my dissertation and my current research on food? In fact, in course of my fieldwork and in-depth reading of primary sources, I came across food as an identity marker, especially for the Mongols of contemporary Henan County, to distinct themselves from the Tibetans. As an example, during one interview, an informant told me, I quote, "We are not really Mongols. We do not speak Mongolian, but Tibetan. Now we eat tsampa like the Tibetans, even though we used to refer it as dorma tsampa." Just a brief explanation. Tsampa is the most common staple food stuff in Tibet, made from roasted barley. And later today, I will get back to tsampa. And dorma are sculptures, mostly made of butter, clay, or tsampa, which symbolize, among other things, food for the gods. Based on the argument from my informant, I did some literature research and came across a historical source of the Qing dynasty, which was translated into Chinese and republished in 2008. Zhongyue Anqing Jianbu wrote that the eating and living habits, as well as the clothing of the Mongols of the Henan grasslands, were very strongly influenced by the Tibetan environment. He states, as well as it's written in the annals of Henan County, that millet was the main food. Here, I have to admit that during my years in that area, I hardly got across dishes made from millet. And a bit later in the text, Zhongyue Anqing Jianbu further elaborates that tsampa, the staple food of the Tibetans, was unknown to the Mongols as a food because it was only known as dorma tsampa. The next worth mentioning is butter. Zhongyue Anqing Jianbu states that the Mongols did not know butter, and only in later years or even centuries, they learned the technology of making butter. However, this is in contradiction with Rubruck's travel report of the 14th century, in which he describes that one of the dishes he ate was made of millet with butter. Again, interesting, the information given in the annals of Henan is in line with Zhongyue Anqing Jianbu that historically the Mongols of Qinghai did not make nor eat butter. Therefore, at least in regard to the Mongols of Qinghai, I can state that butter is surpassingly another typical Tibetan food. Whereas another milk product worth mentioning is a beverage famous among the Mongols but unknown among the Tibetans. Kumis, fermented mare milk. Kumis is the Russian term for the Mongolian ayrak. Matthias Hermans, a missionary who lived in Amdo from 1935 until 1945, gives a detailed account of almost 5 pages on ayrak in regard to the various Mongol groups and the people of the Altai, and the differences to Chang among Tibetans. But back to the Mongols of Henan County, according to the local source written by Gumchurchep, kumis or ayrak was only drunk by the local rulers at celebrations, but not among the normal population. Additionally, in the annals of Henan, reference is only given to mare milk as manai, as well as sheep milk, yangnai, being drunk until the end of the Republican era. Interestingly, no reference at all is given if the milk was drunk fermented or fresh. And during my stays in Henan County, I heard that mare milk is drunk today among the Mongol population, but only fresh and not fermented. The fermented mare milk might hence be another identity marker to highlight the distinction between Mongols and Tibetans. However, I myself never came across Ayrak in Henan County. And last but not least, the consumption of meat has to be mentioned. According to Chumyu Anqingtiambu, as well as to the Annals of Henan, meat and milk are counted as the main staple food for the population of the area of the Henan grasslands. According to the Annals of Henan, besides beef and mutton, camel meat was eaten. In the various interviews, I was told that Mongols used to eat meat of sheep, camels, yaks, and even marmots, but not of horses or pork. In terms of Tibetans, according to Eikei Kawaguchi, who went to Tibet for 5 years in 1900, he reports that pork is eaten, but only by the Tibetans who have been dealing with the Chinese. Again, back to my fieldwork, my interviews highlighted the eating of camel meat and marmot meat, making them distinct from the Tibetans. But this refers only to the past, as in present, there are no more camels in that area. Regarding meat, meat is eaten half-cooked, or as we say in culinary terms, rosé rare, or is eaten air-dried. Why is meat not being roasted? According to Alessandra David-Niel, the smell of roasted meat is not appreciated by the gods, and as Kawaguchi mentions, meat is regarded as unceremonial. That's why Tibetans don't eat roast meat. By keeping in mind that the technique of air drying might have been borrowed from the Mongols, the air-dried meat can be taken as an example that foods are the result of an evolution through cultural transfer. In a recent conversation with Losang Tsiten-Barshi, a Swiss-Tibetan chef de cuisine, he told me that, for instance, the world-famous French cuisine would not be what it is today without its neighboring cultures, such as the influences from Spain and Italy. Due to various impacts, food and dishes have developed as well as changed throughout history. By having given some examples on the different foods of Mongols and Tibetan, it is evident that the food cultures in this area have mixed and complemented each other over the centuries. And at the same time, the various cultures demand foods and foodstuffs to belong to the cultural identity of their ethnic group. Therefore, I argue that food can be viewed as a marker of ethnic identity. And that's actually how I got interested into the food topic, especially by questioning how food binds together to recreate an identity as well to distinct oneself from the others. That's how I got to my research objectives and research questions. The point with defining oneself and one's identity connects with the food topic with cliches like "you are what you eat." Based upon my research conducted for my dissertation, I can say that food serves as a lieu de mémoire. Pierre Nora defines lieu de mémoire as a site of memory. These sites have the ability to transport people to a different time and place or connect them to the past. In this sense, certain dishes can therefore be described as lieu de mémoire. Foods like lieu de mémoire are used as ways to preserve memories and can help people identify with their cultural and familial heritage and define themselves as discovering histories. In fact, food serves an invaluable resource in bridging generation gaps, forming family ties and teaching people about their culture, and is therefore an important part in the lieu de mémoire culture. By using Nora's quotation, "The quest for memory is the search for one's history," I argue that by looking for memories and preserving them, we're hoping to keep a part of us who we used to be. Our cooking practices, eating habits, and traditions can also keep a part of our past. At this point, I just want to mention Grandma's cooking and tastes of our childhood, which makes us feel home, connected with nostalgia of family traditions. In my ongoing research, I hence want to implore how food binds together to recreate an identity. I argue that food functions as an identity builder and the crystallizing force of collective remembrance. Therefore, by maintaining cultural culinary customs, the bond with one's ancestral lands are upheld. And moreover, by passing down recipes from generation to generation, the cultural memory is kept alive, especially among Tibetans living outside their land of origin. My research does not focus on the consumption of foods, but rather on the making of foods as well as on the adaptation to its surrounding, based upon the background that food culture negotiates between tradition and change. Hence, when looking at Tibetans and their history, they have also become subjected to a range of influences and changes in their everyday lives, including food and eating habits. They have been entangled in networks of relations, all of which shape their foods. By taking Tibetan food as an example, it can be shown how cultures are highly interwoven and interdependent. Due to various impacts of cultural transfer, as well as cultural exchange, products from other cultural realms were imported, borrowed, then integrated and incorporated. Consequently, the questions of traditional food arises. In my research, I define traditional foods as foods that have sustained throughout generations. I'm interested in tracing the development of various dishes and their ingredients. And as I stated, Tibetan food has been influenced by its neighbors. Hence, I argue that there is Tibetan regional food as well. The various foods also depend on the lifestyle. Consequently, the so-called traditional dishes depend on the region as well as on the lifestyle. As you can see on this map, Tibet is a huge tract of land, and the different regions of Tibet are having varying in climate. And additionally, the Tibetan plateau hosts enormously varying physical environments, from southeast to northwest of Tibet. Montane forests, alpine meadows, alpine grasslands or steppes, semi-deserts are distributed. Consequently, affected by the alpine altitude and harsh environment, Tibetans have their featured food species and unique dining habits. When talking about Tibet, there are regional distinctions. In terms of regions, when looking at the map, I refer to the three traditional Tibetan provinces of Amdo, Kham, and Yüzang, referring to the Tibetan term as Chukasum. Yüzang refers to contemporary Tibetan autonomous region with Lhasa as its capital. In Yüzang, Indian, Nepali, and British cultural traces can be found. Whereas Kham covers parts of Yunnan and Sichuan, as well as small parts of Qinghai and the Tibetan autonomous region. In Kham, preliminary contacts with Chinese culture and other ethnic groups can be traced. Amdo, again, is concentrated in today's Chinese province of Qinghai and also includes parts of Gansu and Sichuan. In Amdo, there has been a great influence and contribution of Turkic Muslim, Chinese, and Mongol cultures. Matthias Hermanns, who lived in the Amdo region during the Republican time, reports in his book, The Family of Amdo Tibetans, that during festivals, Chinese dishes were served. And his book, Nomads in Tibet, he states that Tibetans sometimes use Chinese spices for the dishes. Due to the location of Amdo and Kham, these areas are often referred to as the Sino-Tibetan borderlands, or in a historical sense, land in between the Tibetan and Chinese empires. Actually, these borderlands have been an area of interactions and mutual influences among the various ethnic groups throughout centuries in this area. Already in Inson Changyao, or in its translation, Proper and Essential Things of the Imperious Food and Drink, written by Hu Sihui in 1330, it contains a large number of non-Chinese recipes for very refined dishes. Since the text is riddled with transcriptions of foreign words, it can be stated that the cuisine during the Yuan dynasty has been influenced by Turkic Mongol and Arab Persian cuisine. Hence, the entanglement of cultures make it difficult to trace back the origin of the various dishes. But however, in course of my ongoing research, I want to trace back the beginning of the various dishes in Tibetan culinary culture. To continue with my overview on Tibet, light has to be shed on Tibetan people. Besides the regional distinction, the Tibetan people identify themselves whether as Drokpa, with the meaning of man in solitude, but actually describing the population that lived or used to live from animal husbandry, simplified translated as nomads, or farmers, the ones from the valley, and even as semi-nomads. And additionally, not to forget the clergy. And as stated by Barstov, in Tibetan Buddhist monasteries, vegetarianism was practiced, but not among nomads. As my research is not dealing with Buddhism, but with Tibetan identity, at this point, I just refer to Barstov's work on vegetarianism, and therefore I won't get deeper into this topic. But in this regard, the distinction between white food and red food should be mentioned. White food is any food contaminated by blood, free from killing, such as milk, butter, cheese, and yogurt. About yogurt, I just want to give a brief quote from Sven Hedin, an explorer of the 19th century, beginning 20th century. He said that he has never tasted anything as good as Tibetan yogurt, and compared to this yogurt, I quote him, oyster and champagne are simply humbug. Back to Tibet. In pre-communist Tibet, besides nomads, farmers, and the clergy, there were also the nobles, who had a more manifolded diet than the others. Alessandra David Nel, for instance, highlights that Tibetan nobles were using spices imported from China, which was only affordable by them. Also in regard to rice, she stated that in most parts of Tibet, rice was a luxurious product imported from India or China, and hence not everybody was able to afford it. More information on food among nobles can be found actually in Heinrich Harre's book, 7 Years in Tibet. In brief, the nomad's diet existed mainly of meat and milk products, and not to forget the wild plants and mushrooms they collected in summer. At this point, I want to quote William Rockhill, who went to Tibet in 1892. The soil all along the route was well covered with grass, and we picked a quantity of delicious kind of mushrooms with a yellow upper skin and white underneath, which we have enjoyed greatly. Fried with butter, they tasted exactly like crêpes à la bordelaise. Perhaps they are crepes. In regard to milk products, there's a dried cheese called chura, which can be regionally distinct, especially based on the shape. As you can see, the left one is chura from Amdo, and the right one, chura necklace from Lhasa. In fact, the nomad's diet was not manifolded, and the farmer's food was made especially with grains and vegetables. Interestingly, the American missionary Robert Eckwall pointed out that in terms of the nutrition of nomads and farmers, I quote, in each case, parched barley flour, meat, butter, and cheese form the staples, but the proportions are different. The diet of the nomad has a higher protein content than that of the farmer. End of the quote. I argue that due to the lifestyle and regional distinctions, there exists also differences in daily diet, especially in terms of the nobles and the nomads and farmers. However, despite the fact that the nobles had a greater variety of food, tsampa remained the main staple food of Tibetans. What is tsampa? As already mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, tsampa is roasted barley flour and the main staple food of Tibetans. And tsampa is kept, as you can see here, in a wooden box or in bags. And there are several ways of preparation of this dish, but the most common way is described by Susie Carson Rinchard, who stayed in Tibet from mid-1895 until 1900. Tsampa is a kind of meal made from parched barley, which, after being thoroughly kneaded with the fingers in a mixture of tea and butter, is taken out in lumps and eaten from the hand. Though Mr. Richard added sugar to make it more palatable, I could not eat it. And the German geographer Alfred Tafel, he calls Zampe the food of barbarians. As a matter of fact, despite that there's a diversity within the single Tibetan group, as I briefly mentioned, Zampe is the main staple food, eaten all over Tibet. When the Chinese People's Liberation Army entered Tibetan territory in the 1950s, Zampe became the unifying force of Tibetans. The Tibetan historian Tserang Chakya wrote an essay, The Tibetan Resistant Leader adopted Zampe as a symbol of Tibetan identity. The Zampe eaters became a rallying point for the resistance. And then in 2008, the modern-day Tibetan resistance movement got a new name, the Zampe Revolution. What important role Zampe plays for the construction of Tibetan identity can be also found in modern Tibetan youth culture as a symbol of resistance as well as of an identity marker. As an example, I want to mention the Swiss-based rapper Chapelet, who raps, "Our parents gave us Zampe, so we'll give it to our kids. The Tibetan spirit will always remain. You can threaten us, but we keep doing our things. You can't stop us." I will play you this song so you know what I was talking about.
Zampe sanyami, oi, kezimi, Türkiye'ci çünün yelen dost yok oi. Nga Zampe sanyamiji, kawa tengi pönjo ne lebuyi. 자스모 두냐다 살금 보상야디, 쇼겸예 알아봐자 견야미 구파유, 구투유의 청구디 기쟁아 듣고요 통구도 그러다. 나 모두 과메, 내가 지능아야 현재 조유. 知道独显的这个kunyu duge away di mingle insa ine di tunda tu tu dak da yon tu ya kakbo samza simda nyunda rock nga tsadanga ne lebi khawa jing phudu Zampe sanyami Zampe sanyami nga phune lebi nga phune lebi Zampe sanyami nga phune hey Liebe Zampe sanyami nga phune hey Liebe phudu nga phune hey Liebe Zampe sanyami nga phune hey Liebe phudu Yeah Zampe sanyami de kunde yume nye lopcho Nyunda nye dreshe gyopcho Zampe sanyami 한번 생님이 맨 고요 미비시 인대칭에디 맨 창고다 샘상고 만주 kum시 참교다 닝지 샘게 멍시 퍼맹 언저 잠버디 만주 부어 잠버디리 푸르기 샘다거디리 아스네시 만주 바즈그레 광고 멋좀 켄중 안주 까투마리 독스도 헤이 nye 샤부디니 독신도 웨이 얘기지 구워메 köbeme 샤부이 러브데 이지 유잔디 nye 차부이 제장 나도 근데 유메 셴버치 커와진 그 푸두 Zampe sanyami Zampe sanyami nga phune lebi nga phune lebi Zampe sanyami nga phune hey lebi Zampe sanyami nga phune hey lebi phudu nga phune hey Liebe Zampe sanyami nga phune Liebe phudu Kisi Zampe sanyami in the way yeah just get love shu Wait Zampe sanyami Zampe sanyami hey Zampe sanyami Kisi ran yon sa phune in the way yeah just get love shu Wait Zampe sanyami hey Zampe sanyami Kisi phunjong kimi rap sabe in the get just get love shu Hey Zampe sanyami hey Zampe sanyami Zampe sanyami nga phune lebi nga phune lebi Zampe sanyami nga phune hey Liebe Zambossanyami ngapu unne hey Liebe Puru ngapu unne hey Liebe Zambossanyami ngapu unne hey Liebe Puru Yeah Manzulamde rungu yune Kwaya gyade dro Nam jimbe kup yune Gyobli nyama shaye to Haha Dağlıda
Oops, sorry. Okay, having given one example how traditional dish became a symbol for Tibetanness, a united Tibetan identity, I now continue with the development of Tibetan cuisine. At least according to my current state of research, the first detailed account on Tibetan food was written by Alessandra David-Niel, who went to Tibet in about 1916 as well in 1924. In her book Gargantua au pied de neige, Cuisine, Tradition and Image, translated in German as Leben in Tibet, she writes that Tibetans have no special cooking skills and they always keep eating the same food. Differences only depend on the various soils on the Tibetan plateau. In her book, she describes the preparation of beverages, foods made of grain, meat, dishes made from meat, milk products such as yogurt, butter, and cheese. And then there is a section of soups. Among one of the soups is called Mongol broth. And in the end, there's also a section on vegetables. In fact, I claim her book to be the first Tibetan cookbook. And the dishes she describes a traditional Tibetan food. But when looking at Tibetan restaurants and Tibetan cookbooks nowadays, many other dishes can be found. Based on my current knowledge, no cookbook existed in the Tibetan cultural realm until the second half of the 20th century. In 1985, Rinchen Dorje published a cookbook called Food in Tibetan Life. In his foreword, he writes, "Most Tibetans learn to cook from an older person who is already a good cook, and they do not have exact written recipes to follow. Cooking is more a matter of experience and common sense, and getting a feeling how things go together and how they should taste and look." Then in course of my research for recipe books, dietary manuals, and so on in Tibetan, I got across the only existing cookbook in Tibetan by Tserem Chimpel, who states that there have not been any textbooks, books, nor commentaries, pictures or paintings on food, on cooking in Tibet. The knowledge on cooking was transmitted orally from generation to generation. Therefore, foods can be interpreted as lieu de mémoire, since recipes are being passed from one generation to the next, and by cooking the way having been taught by the elder generation, the memory keeps alive. And to keep these memories alive, people started writing cookbooks. From the late 1990s, actually 1999, diasporic Tibetans started writing cookbooks. Here you see a selection of the available cookbooks. And then even non-Tibetans started writing cookbooks as lieu de mémoire. Despite the fact that the Tibetan diet was not manifolded at all, contemporary cookbooks show a variety of food. And this supports my argument that food cultures have mixed and complemented each other over the centuries or just decades. Even though some foods have been borrowed from other cultures, Tibetans demand some foods and foodstuff to belong to their cultural identity. And in a global world, the availability of foodstuff is no longer dependent on seasons nor on location. Moreover, today, Tibetan food is accessible not only in restaurants in Tibet and in the Tibetan exiled communities in India. Nowadays, Tibetans share their cuisine globally through the medium of restaurants. In Austria, for instance, the first Tibetan restaurant was opened in Vienna in 1997, and in Switzerland, sometimes in the 1980s. Besides restaurants, the globalized world is getting access to Tibetan cuisines due to the rapidly increasing number of cookbooks on Tibetan food, as well as on online food blogs. As an example of the evolution of dishes, I want to mention the pretty well-known momos, Tibetan steamed dumplings. Momo is actually a Chinese term for bread, which is still used nowadays in Qinghai province. And another famous dish is the tukpa, any soup combined with noodles. Having read the various travel reports, it was quite surprising for me that nobody was writing about momo or hardly anybody reporting on any kind of noodles. In regard to pasta or noodles, only the Lazarist missionaries Yukeng Kabe, who traveled to Tibet in 1844 till 56, they mentioned pasta, nothing else. And Susie Carson Rinchard, she reports about nian, pasta, in 1900. The other nowadays famous Tibetan dish, tukpa, is mentioned by the Jesuit Ippolito Desideri in the early 18th century. I quote, "Tukpa is a kind of watery vegetable broth into which they add, while it's boiling, a little at a time roasted barley flour and chura, a kind of grated cheese." End of the quote. Actually, Desideri did not mention any kind of pasta at all. And up to now, I could not find any other reference to tukpa in any of the travel reports I consulted. The French sinologist Françoise Sabin conducted research actually on pasta in China, and she finds the origin of noodles in the kingdom of Wei in Shanxi around 281 AD, known with the Chinese term bing, a generic term for all dishes made with kneaded wheat flour. Then, with the Tang dynasty, the term nian for wheat flour appears in sources. And only with the Mongols, beginning in the 10th century, pasta became a more refined foodstuff, according to her finding. And based on her findings, I assume that any of the dishes made of wheat flour eaten in Tibet has been imported by the Mongols. And to get back to the momos, the first report I came across who wrote about momos was actually Sir Francis Young Husband, a British army officer who marched into Lhasa in the early 1900s. He describes momos as dumplings of thick pudding wrapped around strange meat. And then Alessandra David-Néel, in her book Au cœur de Himalaya, she talks about momo as steamed pasta balls in its English translation, and in the original, une sorte de petit pâté cuit à la vapeur. Later, in the cookbook, previously mentioned one, she describes momos as dumplings stuffed with minced meat and onions. I'm questioning now myself, when did Tibetans actually begin eating momos and tukpa? Nowadays, in Tibetan restaurants and Tibetan cookbooks, momos made with beef, chicken, and vegetables are promoted, which shows again the development of food and its adaptation to changing food habits. A new food culture is developing. As stated in the very beginning of my lecture, my research is in a very early stage, and therefore, instead of a conclusion, I just come up with questions which are up in my mind. As we learned from the historical reports, Tibetan food was not manifolded at all. But when looking at modern cookbooks and food blogs, there are a variety of Tibetan dishes. Being aware that Tibetan food preliminarily just consisted of meat, milk products, and grain, I claim Tibetan food has developed due to the entanglement with neighboring cultures. Sometimes it's even difficult to say what is typical Tibetan, or rather Chinese, Indian, or Turkic origin. I'm questioning myself, when did the average Tibetan start cooking dishes, besides various soups? Millet used to be one of the main grain, but almost disappeared in contemporary Tibetan food. I couldn't get along any millet recipes in the cookbooks. When did millet disappear from Tibetan food? Another question, why is there such a trend of writing Tibetan food blogs? What does actually Tibetan food being so interested that more and more cookbooks are written? Recipes in the various cookbooks and blogs published outside of contemporary China are mainly influenced by Indian cuisine. Can the borrowing of Indian taste be actually interpreted as a resistance against the Chinese? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ute. This is a very interesting speech, and I'm feeling hungry because it's lunchtime in Helsinki. I'm not really an expert on Tibetan food, but I remember around 2 years ago, I did a research on Taiwanese food, and I realized it is also very difficult to define what is traditional Taiwanese food because of the waves of migrations from mainland China, and also now the globalization has made it quite difficult to define what is exactly, a particular food attached to identity. And you do point out the difficulty here. I wonder if now, Dina, you have some, questions or thoughts to share with us?
Okay, thank you. So just to introduce myself, so we actually know from the field with Ute, as she said earlier. So I'm a PhD candidate here at the University of Helsinki, and my field is religious studies and mainly Tibetan Buddhism. And that's why I was very hesitant in the beginning when Julie asked me to be the discussant, because I'm not an expert on food or Tibetan food. And also I'm not a big fan of Tibetan food, but I have had my a big share of my Tibetan food, of course, because I've lived among the Tibetans in different places. But then I thought that, okay, I love food in general, I love to cook. And then I started to think that actually I do miss Tibetan food. And I'm a long-term vegetarian, and I have been able to survive 30 years, 25 years of Tibet without starting to eat meat, which is kind of surprising. So I do miss tentuk, I do miss momos, I do miss tsampa and all these kind of things. So what I want to start, so thanks so much, Ute. This was very interesting. I was kind of the kind of historical background, and kind of you laid out the possible research questions in the future. And I wanted to start with, because what also Julie mentioned earlier, that I was trying to look for some research done on Tibetan food culture. And as you said, Ute, there actually isn't much. And the first question I want to ask is, why do you think that the situation is like that? Because there's so much research that has been done over like Tibetan Buddhism and maybe language, some other things, but why not on Tibetan food?
Well, that's a good question I'm asking myself all the time. And maybe because there's a lack of sources. And as there is no tradition of cookbooks, and I'm also interested if time and the political situation allows to go to Tibet and maybe to go to monasteries to find maybe some records, what kind of food they got in as a tax or they bought. So maybe just because of the written sources, you can kind of have an idea of what they were eating and what they were cooking. And the second step is there is this Tibet Oral History Project. They interviewed Tibetans in Dharamsala or anywhere else in exile about their memory, and only very few I went through those interviews, and very few reported about food. And the thing is, the older generation is now passing away, And I'm soon also going to Switzerland again, and I try to find contacts of the old noble society, of the nobles, because they have a different kind of food. So this is, I think it's just a topic which is hard to get access to. And whenever you talk about Tibet, Tibetan food is always tsampa and butter tea. I didn't want to go too deep into the butter tea story because I think it's pretty famous, but it's not known because of the cuisine.
Mhm. So in general, I think this is a great and fascinating topic, and I'm really glad that you have taken it up. And so from what you just said, so I reckon that you are trying to find some written sources, and then are you planning to do some kind of ethnographic field work in conjunction with I know you have spent a lot of time like among the nomads in Amdo province or Qinghai province, and do you think you have already collected enough materials, or do you want to, are you thinking about interviewing some people about their relationship to food or something like this?
Like I will do ethnographic fieldwork, but first of all in Switzerland, because in Switzerland is the largest Tibetan community in Europe. Because of all the travel restrictions, I focus now on the diasporic Tibetans. And I'm actually in touch with people in Lhasa, and also I asked my friends and older informants in Henan, and also Qinghai, and also at the Tibet Research Institute in Beijing, if they could help me to get any sources. And everybody was like, I don't know, there isn't anything. So I hope one day I can go back and do ethnographic fieldwork. And I would like to also even going to nomads and also the farmers, and maybe record the way they are preparing food. Because this is a kind of a cultural heritage, how to prepare food, how to make noodles, how to make the dough, in what way, in what direction do you have to knead the dough. Because there's a special thing going on in China among the Chinese cuisine with noodles, and the Tibetans have a different way of preparation, and also the Italians. So there has to be some ethnographic fieldwork being done, but no idea when.
And have you started with the fieldwork in Switzerland and Austria? Like you said that you have been cooperating with this one chef, and you know, like what I would be really fascinated about to find out, first of all, maybe I have two questions in conjunction with this. How big is the Swiss diaspora of Tibetans? And then second one, how can you see, like, are they keeping up their so-called traditional food customs?
Okay, first of all, about how many diasporic Tibetans are living in Switzerland, I have no idea. There is no real number, like we can guess, but especially you can consult the various associations and organizations, but as most of them are holding a Swiss passport, it's not very easy to get the right number. But especially as I'm more or less more in touch with the elder generation, especially the Tibetans who came to Switzerland with the Red Cross in the beginning of the 1960s. They soon retire or already are retired, so they start being more aware of their Tibetan identity. What does it mean being Tibetan? And because with their help, I try to get to know more about the recipes, and especially me having lived and many experiences with Tibetan food in Amdo, I have hardly any idea on Lhasa. And I call him a cooperation partner, Losenzi Barshi in Basel. He is actually from a noble family in Lhasa. And he's a trained chef, he was trained in Switzerland. And with him, it's also like I learn a lot about this influence of the various foods and the herbs and the way of preparation and the adaptation of food. and the dishes to the Western style.
Yes.
So as I said, it's in the beginning and I already did a lot.
Yeah. And I have so many questions, concerning. It's so interesting. And I will tell you that, well, in Finland, I think I'm not sure about the current situation, but we have always had less than 10 Tibetans, resident, from Tibetan background, some of them from the Chinese Tibetan area, some of them from India, born in India and so forth. But we even have one Tibetan restaurant in Helsinki, which was started in 2019, and I just went to check their menu.
Mm-hmm.
And it has survived the pandemic, surprisingly, because not all the restaurants have. And I was just looking at, they have this kind of Tamil Dharamsala kind of fusion, this kind of tourist fusion food. And I was just wondering, that when you work like with this chef in Switzerland, is this the kind of food they are also serving? This is my first question. And second one, if they are not, or if they are, where do they get the kind of ingredients? Like, for example, if they serve tsampa, the roasted barley flour, you have to have the Tibetan one. I have brought many times some roasted tsampa, fresh tsampa, as they always say, to some of my Tibetan friends in Europe. So how are they getting, like ingredients? Do you have any idea yet?
Okay, about the tsampa, there is, I don't know for how many years, a tsampa production in Switzerland. And last year, I think it was last year, a tsampa production started in Germany by Tibetans.
Okay, that's very interesting. And do they think that it's the real? Does it taste as good as the real tsampa, from Amdo?
Well, even when you talk about tsampa, you have to differentiate. There is the white tsampa, the black tsampa, so it's a different taste even among the Tibetan tsampa flour, yeah.
But are they happy with the one that's being used in Germany in general? Like, can they sell it?
As far as I know, but still those tsampa producers, I still want to interview. But as far as I know, they're very happy how business is going. But tsampa is preliminary bought by Westerners. And even the young Tibetan and the younger Tibetan generation, even back in Tibet, they don't really appreciate tsampa that much anymore.
And why do you think that is? Is it just too heavy, or?
It's too heavy, and you have all those new influences of tastes. There's so much new taste. And because of the new living conditions, there's actually no more need having this heavy, fatty food. And so the new food trends and also fast food is coming up among the young people.
Yeah, I'm thinking perhaps now we can also check the questions in the chat.
Yes.
Because I see there are some questions. I wonder if Ute, can you read that?
Yeah, I'm just Katarina about the millets. So far, I couldn't get too deep into the botanical issues and the agricultural issues of millet, so I have no idea about the Latin name so far. So I'm really sorry, because even if you check the Gyushi, the Tibetan, the 4 tantras on the science of healing, it's so difficult to find the proper translation of those terms. That's why I can't really answer the question so far, yeah. And I just know about like barley. There are 16 or 17 different kinds of barley all among the Tibetan plateau. And I just know that there are 16 or 17 varieties, but I have no idea about the Latin names.
Yeah, unless somebody wants to explain to us those differences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
the next comment.
Yeah,
Joel?
yes, the Amdo was eating wild herbs such as droma. Droma, for instance, is a root which is eaten among the Tibetans, and many times I wanted to mention droma, but because of lack of time, I didn't. Droma can be even found in 2 or 3 travel reports, so it is mentioned. And droma is explained also in Uchi's dissertation briefly. And the other ones, those are all wild plants, which are eaten among the nomads, a kind of spinach or nettles, and also onions, garlic. So there is a lot being eaten by Tibetans in Amdo, what I learned from my ethnographic fieldwork, having lived so many years in Amdo, but I couldn't find any reports in the travel report so far. I hope this is kind of answering the question.
There is another comment about the popularity of Tsamba. It's experiencing a revival. People think this is a food that they can trust. What do you think about this?
There is a lot of what Julie says may refer to Tibetans within the People's Republic of China, because there's a huge issue on food security. And also there's a lot going on in China, not only on Tsamba, also with vegetarianism in regard to food security. And this, I don't want to get too deep into it. And this is why I rather think that Tsamba is maybe not so popular because of the safety, but more as an identity marker. And also, to get back to Tsamba, there's also a very interesting rap song having been published 2 or 3 years ago by a Tibetan in Amdo, and the lyrics were written by Menlatep, and combining tradition and modernity. So, but again, I think Tsamba is more an identity marker in terms of resistance, as Tserang Shakya applied.
Thank you. Well, now we have two participants who would like to speak. So first is Anissa, and then Zaver. Sorry if I pronounced it incorrectly. Sorry. So Anissa.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't think so. My video.
Well, it's not very clear when you turn on the video. Maybe you don't need a video.
Okay,
Would that be better?
Yeah, works fine. Is this good?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Is it okay? And yeah, it was it was really nice to see a lot of familiar food on the slides, and also like I'm recently working on something similar, and there are some forthcoming, research and work that talks about this particular idea of how or why Tibetan foods have not been written about or talked about as such. But what I also mention in all those articles is that these cuisines as such are passed on, right? Like you mentioned, even in the oral, it's passed on orally, and also like writing and recording things are also part and a form of a privilege that a lot of people don't have in a way. And that is how it gets passed on. And that is what I've noticed in my household. I've noticed in my people that I've interacted with when I ask them, so where have you learned this cooking, and say if it is Tibetan cuisine or if it is any other form of mixed that you also highlighted as maybe like not so much the traditional Tibetan food per se, in a way, right? So in the similar sense, I was just wondering, so when you mentioned that you will be exploring the diasporic population and their relation with food, is it, for the beginning part, is it limited to, like Switzerland and Vienna, and then you are hoping to expand it to other diaspora within India as well, because there have been lots of influences in these regions as well. And I think that would tie on well with the project that you're already working on, right? Like I couldn't get the name, but yeah, because
Cultural
that's what I
transfer.
realized, that I couldn't separate. Yeah, that I couldn't separate while writing on it, that I couldn't separate per se that this is the Tibetan food. Like there are so many influences per se that has been like happening, and also so many changes even in the kitchen that has been happening. You do not have the certain utensils that you use now. There's like mixing grinders and stuff like that. So like, yeah, I think I just like, yeah, I don't know if it made sense.
Yeah. Well, about my research, yes, I want to go further. And the idea of doing the research preliminary now in Austria and Switzerland, and I will also move on to Germany, is because of the travel restrictions currently, and we've no idea when we can travel to Asia again.
Yeah.
And I'm also already in touch with several Tibetans in the US and in Canada. And like, I'm really trying to extend my network, especially as there's so much going on with Tibetan food blogs.
Yeah.
And it's just, for the beginning, I think I'm more focused on I say the German-speaking world.
How about Xavier? Because we have to watch the time. Maybe Xavier can post your questions.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Ute, thank you. Very interesting presentation. Very much enjoyed it. And I found another cookbook just for your interest.
Oh, that's the one 2006. Yeah. Also, I think this is the new one after this one.
2011, it says.
11, and that's the following up of this one.
Yes. And just like browsing through this book, which you now can't see, I think it clearly reflects sort of Chinese aesthetics, so to say. So the Tibetan food seems to be arranged and presented in a way usually you see food in a Chinese restaurant, maybe, which I'm not sure if that is really authentic Tibetan, if that exists. So this just like a comment on the side, and but I wanted to ask you whether you have considered looking into historical texts, and or if you have already looked and found incidents of what descriptions of food or mention of food, or because I think that might be really interesting to see or get another idea of what original food was like, or what was the kind of food Tibetans speak about, as opposed to what maybe travelers or explorers were talking about.
Well, thanks for the comment. Actually, I really just work on the sources which were available online or at home because of the restricted access to libraries and to anywhere. And as I'm stuck in Vienna and not a member of the University of Vienna anymore, I was not allowed to enter the library. So actually I intend to, when I finished reading all this available material on travel reports, I'd like to get in touch with historians, also like Per and Guntram, if they have found anything in their texts, and also maybe ask Tibetologists about, like you working on Namtars, if there's anything written on nutrition and food. If you know any texts or whatever, I'm really happy. or if you know anybody who knows anything.
Yeah, actually, we have several people who are maybe able to help out in the chat. There's this Julie, again, it's not me, but she said she and her husband has written a cookbook, and so maybe perhaps Julie, you can contact Ute after this, right? And
That would be great.
yeah, and also we have another participant, Lisa Veta. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned food blocks. What food blocks would you recommend? Chinese and English are both okay for her. So could you tell a bit more? Food blocks. Maybe we stop here first, and then you can comment.
Okay, like there is a very nice one, Simply Tibetan. It's called Simply Tibetan or something. And I don't have it, I have to look for the link. So if anybody is interested in the various, please send an email to me. And then I will send you the various links. There are food blogs in Chinese, Tibetan, and in English.
Yeah. And there is a participant, Lubos, would like to speak. Lubos?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Well, thank you very much, Ute. It's very interesting, and I would like to add one point, which is a historical point. But first of all, I would like to show you some pictures. I try to share screen. I hope this one. Can you see the picture, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is from 1954. It's built up road from Jan to Lhasa, and our Czechoslovak filmmakers Vladimir Sis and Josef Vaniš, they made a movie about this construction. Now we can see Chinese military personnel eating on the road. This is a kitchen, and now we can see Tibetans eating tsampa. This is very interesting picture because it's food as other goods selling to Tibetans from Chinese. And this is our filmmakers eating for the very first
Sorry,
time.
we don't see. I think your screen is frozen.
Ah, sorry. Okay, never mind. I made a mistake probably. Now you can see?
No.
No.
Yeah,
oh,
yes,
okay,
yes,
now we
yes.
see something, a picture.
Yes, okay. But what I would like to add, the role of food supply in 50s in Tibet, it was a very important point. I mean, as one of roots of Tibetan uprising. And what's interesting is that we have witnesses from Czechoslovak travelers to Tibet and as well as to Mongolia in 50s. They spent there a lot of time, and they produced, we can say, two kinds of witnesses. The first one is the official witness, I mean in reportage, in published articles and so on. And the very interesting second witnesses are their personal travelogues, which were not intended to be published. And there we can get the true information about food in Tibet as well as in Mongolia during this time. So if it would be interesting for your project, Ute, I would like to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louis. I think we should meet and talk.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think we have several participants here who really would like to contact you. So do feel free to contact Ute and share. We have also one more question because time is running out. I'm sorry for rushing, but there's another question from Priyanka. She is asking about monastic food habits. I wonder if Ute can say something. And maybe we should, Lupos, maybe we can stop sharing the screen.
Yes. I'm
Thank you.
trying now. I hope
Yes.
it's okay. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
About food and monastic
food habits.
Monastic food habits, like if in some, at least in some travel reports, there are distinctions between the food eaten by, I call it normal monks, and food eaten by Rinpoches. So there used to be a difference. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the recently published book by Bostov, Food of Sinful Demons, that's actually the book I can really recommend when you want to know more about monastic food. But the food in the monastic life is more on a Buddhist identity and not a Tibetan identity in my research. That's why I can't tell you so much. And gender issue and food is actually food where women were responsible for the white food, like milk products and so on, and the men for the red food and for the animals. That's what I can contribute.
Thank you. So I wonder if we have further questions, or even from Dina, if you have further thoughts. This is the last round of calling. Dina, everything's okay? Do you have thoughts?
Yes, I wanted to, because you talk about you want to kind of look at the food as like a part of identity and building up the identity. And I still actually, I asked earlier, but maybe you didn't remember to answer, or maybe you haven't gotten into that place yet, maybe not because of the pandemic and so forth. But do you think that in general, like here in Finland, I work a lot with people who, well, students from Vietnamese background, and the food is extremely important to them. Like they are Finnish kids, they were born here, but of course their background is with Vietnamese parents, but the food is so important. So would you say that it's the same like with the diaspora families in diaspora, that they keep up these kind of food customs among the Tibetans? Do you think that?
I think it's what I mentioned also in the talk is the nostalgia and the childhood taste. And when you remember as a mother, when you're pregnant, the food you eat, your children are used to the taste and the childhood memories and the smell. So when you grew up in a Tibetan family or in a Tibetan surrounding, you have these kind of tastes, and that's what reminds you. And like just from a personal experience, my kids having grown up in Tibet, in Tibetan areas, they prefer Chinese and Tibetan food than Austrian food. So this is, I think it's more because of the way tastes and smells are developing in your lifetime.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from our participants here? I remember that Ute has put down her contact information in the chat. So in case you want to contact her, please write down. And also, again, I would like to repeat, we have recorded this event. So some people are asking me, they have missed the beginning. This is no problem. I will share this very soon, latest by tomorrow. So you will be able to recap. Right. So if there is no further questions, then I would like to thank both Ute and Dina for giving this very joyful conversation in hot summer in Europe. Not that hot, but I'm imagining. And food even spice up the feeling, and it arouse a lot of memories in each of us. Maybe not all of us are born as Tibetan, but it does arouse certain memories in the cuisine and culinary taste. Thank you so much. And please also keep us updated about your research results. Ultimately, we would look forward to reading the publications. Thank you. In due course, no stress. I know.